Friedrich Nietzsche is one of the most original of modern thinkers in the Western tradition. One of the greatest and most devastating critiques of the Judeo-Christian tradition is offered by Nietzsche in a number of works, including Beyond Good and Evil, and also the work that we're looking at today, the Genealogy of Morals. I'm joined by Sandy Lynch and Tim Smart to discuss this work. And I want to begin just by reading a passage from the first essay. The work is made up of three essays. And in my edition, this is on page 39, where he's contrasting the pagan world and the Judeo-Christian world. And he says, the Romans were strong and aristocratic. A nation stronger and more aristocratic has never existed here on earth, has never even been dreamt of. Every Roman relic, every Roman inscription enraptures us, so long as we can glean what it is that writes the inscription. The Jews, conversely, were a priestly nation of resentment par excellence, possessing a unique genius for morality that would prove popular among the peasants. Just compare the nations with analogous gifts such as the Chinese or the Germans to the Jews to realise what is first rate and what is fifth rate. Which of them has been victorious in the end, Rome or Judea? There is not a shadow of a doubt. Just consider before whom in Rome itself you now genuflect, as though before the quintessence of all the supreme values, and not only in Rome, but over almost half the world, everywhere where man has been tamed or is willing to be tamed, to 3 Jews, as we know, and 1 Jewess, to Jesus of Nazareth, to Peter the fisherman, to Paul the carpet weaver, and to the mother of the aforesaid Jesus, named Mary. This is very remarkable. Rome is undoubtedly defeated. Now, Nietzsche here is really describing the incredible success of the Christian revolution, that the Christianity, which he says earlier is the sort of culmination of, as he sees it, of Judaism, completely changed the world, and from an aristocratic morality in which values like glory and honour and fame were esteemed, we got a new morality, what he calls disparagingly a herd or a slave morality, which glorifies the weak and the poor and the helpless over the strong and the, as he deems it, the noble and the aristocratic. It's a very powerful statement, isn't it, about the success of the Judeo-Christian ethic and the transformative power it's had on the world.
Mm-hmm. It is, and it's. I mean, he goes so far as to say, and now we don't even need Christianity because it's the whole culture is infected with the herd morality.
Yeah.
So he's right. I think he's right in that extent. Even those people who aren't Christian will see morality in the kind of communal terms that he is criticising. So his focus is on the individual and the individual's will, as you will have read, I mean, you know, will to power.
Yeah.
And I think that's the challenging thing for us. So for him, Napoleon becomes the ideal. It's both monster and Superman in terms of acting on his will to power.
And you know, suppressing what Nietzsche says is conscience, which is somehow just manufactured.
Yes.
We all have this sort of sense of right and wrong, but he says that's really a construct.
Yes, we conform to that construct, and what needs to happen is that we free ourselves completely to that and open ourselves to what he refers to as our Dionysian impulses, to passion, to excess.
Yeah.
And the Apollonian impulses are there too in terms of reason and order. but it's a kind of interesting combination of the two,
Yeah.
and it's determined by the strength of one's own will.
Yeah. You mentioned that it is pervasive, that everyone is, you mentioned in Nietzsche's terminology, infected by this morality. And he says, doesn't he, even liberals, by which he means progressives, people who believe that they've moved on from Christianity, he says even their worldview is completely saturated with the Judeo-Christian ethic. And later in the third essay, he has this to me wonderful, exhilarating moment where he's talking about this supposed tension between Christianity and science, and he says all these scientists are actually basing everything they do on the same metaphysical presupposition that there is such a thing as truth, and that the Judeo-Christian ethic is really responsible for imparting, and spreading this notion that there is a truth, that we can know it. And science might think that it's opposed, but in fact it's built on the same root. And what we have to do, if we're really to be revolutionary, is to root out any notion, or to challenge the notion that there is a truth. Because that gets in the way, as you were saying, Sandy, of the will. This is terrifying, isn't it? What do you think, Tim?
Yeah, I think it is extremely uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I mean, this has been one of the most influential books in the history of moral philosophy. And it's, I guess, one of the reasons it's been so influential is it displays this method, which is sort of what you were describing, which is some people find very, very uncomfortable, this method of genealogy or genealogical explanation, which is where you take a concept which seems very commonsensical, seems like there's widespread consensus on what it's about. So his is like good and bad, but you can do it for truth as well. And then you provide a genealogy.
So it has a history.
Yeah, that concept, and you're like, good and bad are not just like neutral terms or just commonsensical terms, but actually like we got the content of those concepts through this very like contingent, unique history, and that history could have gone quite another way, and then we would have meant something different with these concepts. And so when you then tell that history, and in this book, his history is like we have these terms good and bad, which have this unique history throughout the Judeo-Christian tradition. And so he says we needn't like ascribe that meaning to these concepts. There was another possible way they could have gone, say if Rome never fell or Christianity never rise or something like that. And then that's meant to create a whole lot of doubt or skepticism about these terms. So it's like, wow, these terms, good or bad, don't necessarily mean that, or this term truth doesn't necessarily mean that. Perhaps there's another way to go with those concepts, which I think is a very, very powerfully disruptive kind of argument to give.
And he says there's an agenda as well.
Yeah.
So you might think that these are commonsensical notions, but the reason that they were promoted was to serve another purpose, which was, so that the weak could actually triumph over the strong. And so, it looks like it's self-sacrificing, but it's really built on resentment. The reason you say do good to those who persecute you, or that you believe that we should serve the poor and so on, isn't really selfless. He says there's some other motivating factor in that, and he comes back to this resentment
And fear, he says, as well, that in fact the reason that we have this strong morality and these strong moral judgments that we make within the Judeo-Christian tradition is that in fact keeps those people who might express their willed power against us at bay. Or, it limits their power. And so he thinks that both fear and resentment and even hatred, he talks about hatred too, although Tim, when he's talking about his social history, there's something a little bit contradictory in what he says, because he says that he is taking the Greek notion of morality, and the Romans are used as examples as well, as you said, Stephen, and that in fact that was there first, and then along came Christianity. But later, when he's talking about the Jews in particular, he says that in fact the aristocratic morality that he's recommending grew out of the hatred of the Jews. And there's something quite contradictory about this, and I think there's something about his anti-Semitism that's a little odd. I think you made before we were talking, you made a comment about that there can be contradictions in his work that are worrying from a philosophical point of view. But from a practical point of view, I think he's got something to tell us. He's got something to tell us about our attitude to others, about the tall poppy syndrome.
Yeah, and I feel like, interestingly, one of the paradoxes, or one of the points of tension in this book is because, of course, Nietzsche advocates for this very strong aristocratic morality. But then he has this, I think he has this reluctant respect for Christian and Judeo-Christian morality,
so too,
because he's like, well, they won. So I respect that they won. They caused Rome to fall. So, they were the victor in some sense. And that's what he's inclined to respect.
Yes, you go to Rome in his time, and even now, and he means there that the Pope, people genuflecting to the Pope, genuflecting to Christ, to the cross, and to the sacrament in churches, praying to Mary, devoted to Peter and to Paul, and he just finds this absolutely, in his world historical terms, extraordinary. These people, in his sense, were the losers, in the ancient world, and the Romans somehow were the great, the culmination of aristocratic civilizations and this great military power, and they've been taken over. When you go to Rome now, it's Christian Rome. But there is also, when you say there is this sort of grudging respect for the Judeo-Christian ethic, and I'm connecting those because he does, doesn't he? He sees them as very much connected. But then there's this rather dark prophecy towards the end. He talks about, basically what this all leads to is the obliteration of everything else, and to the point where it's now consuming itself, and that you couldn't get atheism without Christianity and Judaism having first done the work of abolishing all the other gods. Then you get the one God, and the notion that there is truth left there, and that in itself now is going to be challenged. And he talks about the next 200 years, and he says it will be this devastating, great 100-act play in which he anticipates a complete re-evaluation of value, of morality, and that basically you don't get to reject Christianity, in his estimation, and keep the nice bits. That something what we would regard as terrifying and horrible is going to emerge once those things are set aside. And the reason I say prophetic is because, of course, in the 20th century, awful thing, on a grand scale, unprecedented in human history, took place. And really a lot of that under the banner of rejecting morality as it had been understood for at least 2,000, but if not more years.
Yes. And I think when he talks about moral judgment having in common with religious judgment that it believes in realities that don't exist, he's opening this void up to us. So then what happens? Well, we have to wait and see what fills that void. And I mean, it's a very disturbing view of the moral landscape for human beings.
He says without truth, and he's saying we've got to challenge the notion of truth. And he says without truth, everything is permitted. Which is a notion that's, of course, explored also by Dostoevsky. Without truth, everything is permitted. So that, you, in that sense, you can't, once you give up, once you sort of say we can't be certain of truth, everything is permitted. Can you say that it's wrong to murder someone? Can you say that it's wrong to do terrible things? I mean, even the notion that it's terrible is somehow, in his estimation, constructed. Am I right in that?
Oh, I think so. I think he's opening this up, and his ideal person, as in Napoleon is both monster and Superman, does whatever he likes to achieve his goal and
Yeah.
acts on his will with impunity,
Yeah.
and is to be praised
Yeah.
for that. So it is a kind of terrifying version, but at the same time, I think that what it has to say to us is and I'm accepting that we're operating within that, even if we're not Christians, we're
Yeah.
operating within that cultural framework. That it's saying to us, be careful of conformity. Think about, what it is to be. Lionel Trilling's work on authenticity and sincerity comes to mind. You could be a very sincere Christian, but are you being an authentic person? And there's the difficult question of thinking, well, how do you bring those together? And I think his work can lead to that kind of conversation, and to that extent, I think it's really worthwhile.
Yeah. Or am I just following, in terms
Yes,
of
exactly.
authenticity,
Yeah.
am I just doing this without thinking about it?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. It's, am I right that really until Nietzsche there is nothing there is no critique as devastating of Christianity as this in philosophical terms? Or are there others?
Certainly in terms of the morality that it would produce.
Yes.
Yeah.
David Hume gave a number of powerful arguments for doubting aspects of the miracles and
Yes.
the existence of God and
Yeah.
things like that, which came along a bit beforehand. But
Yes.
definitely in terms of this is the form of life which Christianity gives rise to, or this is the culture which Christianity has sort of produced, if you take that wide-scale lens over the past 2,000 years or something like that. Definitely Nietzsche, I would say.
Yeah.
I think so too, because the Hume's scepticism, there's a value in that, but he's still saying, well, we have this inner feeling that directs us, this natural sentiment towards virtue.
Yeah.
And Nietzsche would say, well, no, we don't have that.
Because Nietzsche's also anti-enlightenment, isn't he? It's not just anti-Christianity,
Yeah.
he's
Yes.
anti-enlightenment.
He's anti-utilitarian even.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about, we've touched on some of the disturbing aspects of the work. I mean, he has a lot in there. He's writing, of course, in the 19th century, but he has a lot in there about the blonde beast. He obviously, I mean, even though he's critical through the work of anti-Semitism, and some he disparages and says they're anti-Semites and not to be taken seriously. Nonetheless, it's hard not to read his work as in some sense anti-Semitic, even if that means in a broad cultural sense of anti-Jewish and anti-Christian, because he sees Christianity as the culmination of Judaism and the triumph of what he sees as resentment. But he talks about the blonde beast, he talks about the sort of Aryan heroes and so on. Is it fair to tarnish Nietzsche with as a sort of prefigurement of Nazism? Is it fair?
I would say yes, because I think that that's all there, and there are contradictions as we drew attention to before, but certainly that is there, and I think that for me that's a very worrying aspect. But at the same time, I think that he, when he comes at that notion, he's awakening something, and I think I made this point before. He's awakening something in us that ought to make us think about why we commit to what we commit to, whatever that is. So I think that his view is that the blonde beast, the Superman is to be admired because he, which is it's always he, is creating his own sense of values. So reassessing, reevaluating values. So that he's got his own particular sense of that, but there's something incredibly nihilistic about that, because what happens when we all have our own sense of values and we all act on them? Surely it's
and
going
they're
to be
incommensurable.
Yeah, it's going to be chaos. we imagine. And when sometimes I'm reading him, I think, I know why this man ended up in an insane asylum, because there's something so over the top about the way in which he, the language that he uses. But at the same time, there is something worthwhile there telling us that we have a tendency to conform without thinking, as I mentioned before. Yeah.
That's a great note on which to finish. Thank you both.